In week 2 of the Powerlifting Mentorship program, we're going to talk about program design, key fundamental parts of creating workout programs for people that want to get strong. When I asked you guys what you wanted to learn about, almost every one of you said that you wanted more information about program design. And this is going to be a multi-part feature. It's a complicated but fun topic, and I'm excited to go over with it. Hopefully you found the book all about program design to be a very useful supplement. So we're going to kind of talk about some of the key chapters in there. And our main focus here for powerlifters is, well, what's the difference in programming size versus strength? Okay, of course, there's a relationship. We talked about last week the importance of muscle with two factors there, one being neuromuscular coordination, the ability of your brain to use the muscles that you have effectively to produce that motor pattern, and then the second one simply being muscle size. A bigger muscle can generate more horsepower, has the potential for greater force. So first, let's just tease out a little bit of broad differences when we talk about the training differences between size and strength. If you're training for size, your primary goal is to recruit and fatigue new motor units. All right? So just to take a quick step back, your muscle is made up of many different motor units. You probably heard of type 2 and type 1 muscle fibers, and really motor units is a better description there. So just for example, let's say that my bicep has about 100 motor units inside of it. And each motor unit is one nerve, and then the different muscle fibers it innervates. So let's just say that my bicep has 10,000 muscle fibers in it, and if I had 100 motor units, each one of those might control 100 muscle fibers. Okay? Well, you're not able to recruit 100 motor units right off the bat. Okay, that's part of neuromuscular coordination. So most people, actually new people, can only train and only recruit about half of their motor units. You take a brand new person off the street, make them do curls, even if they try hard, only half of their muscles actually working. And only the part of the muscle that works actually responds to the exercise. So that means half of those fibers, right, 5,000 of those fibers basically just sat there dormant because the person couldn't turn them on. It's like having a light switch in your house that you can't find, and then you can't turn those light bulbs on. So what happens is over time as we train, we learn how to recruit new motor units. And then most studies show that advanced lifters are recruiting 80 to 90% of their motor units, but that still means 10 or 20% are kind of left there dormant. And those, particularly those last ones, typically just tend to be more the type 2B, the harder ones to fire, but at the same time give you better results. So your goal when you're training for size is you want to keep using new motor units. So you want to get to that 80%, and then 82%, and then 84%, and you want to hit as many of those 10,000 muscle fibers as you have, because again, only the muscle fibers stimulated and fatigued then respond. So if you just do a wimpy training program, you only hit a few fibers and they don't really change very much. Okay, so that's your number one goal when it comes to size. And that means you're going to be taking those sets more to fatigue. We'll talk about that more in a second. When it comes to strength, again, there's a relationship, of course, between size and strength. But really with strength, what you're trying to do is you're trying to optimize the ability of those current motor units. You're trying to get that motor pattern to fire as coordinated and as effective as possible. Right? If I went in and I wanted to become a baseball player, they wouldn't look at me and be like, hey, you got to be a lot bigger. It would just be like, hey, you got to use the muscles that you have to a better degree to throw the ball, hit the ball, whatever it is that I wanted to do. So with strength, we're not necessarily, our number one goal isn't to get into new motor units, it's to make the ones that we have work as well as possible. Of course, in real life, it's going to be a balance of the two, but you want to know what your goal is for that specific workout going into it. So let's take a look at our program design key variables. So we have teased out from our big program design chart, we have teased out our three main goals: strength, size, fancy word for that is hypertrophy, and then M endurance is muscle endurance, just so we can kind of see and contrast some differences there. So those are the three rows that we have, and then coming across here, right, we have how many exercises per workout are we going to do. So that's per one workout, walking to the gym. How many total exercises should we do? How many exercises per area of the body or per movement should we focus on? How many WU is warm-up, so how many warm-up sets should we do per exercise? How many reps should we do per exercise? And this is mainly working sets. How many sets, work sets, should we do per exercise? Okay, what's our total load going to be in terms of a percent of our 1 rep max? And then how long do we rest in between those working sets? So first, before you do any kind of compare and contrast, you just got to know your basics. So if you walk around knowing this, right, and having this information in, you will have a very good fundamental idea of how to set up programs. Now I want to mention that one variable is very important is exercise selection. Which exercise are you choosing? On that, I'm not going to talk about that in this particular video because it's important enough to warrant its own section. So as we're talking about differences, kind of imagine someone had a similar program, right? Imagine someone was going to do some squats and some lunges and some leg presses and some leg curls. All right, well, what are then the differences, assuming we have similar exercises that have been selected? So let's start with strength. Okay, if you're a powerlifter, most of the time you're focused on training for strength. Okay, so how many exercises in general should you plan to do per workout? 4 to 7 is pretty common. So if you're only doing 2 exercises, it's probably not enough total work. But if you're doing like, oh, I'm going to do 12 exercises today, think quality over quantity, and be aware that you may have fatigue, that workout may take forever, or you're not spending enough time per exercise. So 4 to 7 good quality exercises every time you go into the gym. Okay, how many exercises should I do per area? So let's say I wanted to focus on my chest and my back, for example. If I was going to do a routine like that, and of course there's a million routines to choose from, I would want to choose 2 to 5 per area. So 2 to 5 for my chest, 2 to 5 for my bench pressing motion, and then 2 to 5 for my back or my lats. Okay, if I choose 5 though, that's going to exceed, right? That's going to put me at 10 total, so I got to watch fatigue there. Again, quality over quantity. Okay? But if you only do 1 exercise per area, it's probably not enough. You need more than that to optimize strength. How many warm-up sets should we do? Here, you're going to notice more of a difference than some of the other variables. Okay? When it comes to strength, we're assuming you're lifting relatively heavy. Also, one huge joy of warm-up sets is they do a great job of ingraining that perfect motor pattern. Right? Your warm-up sets should look like textbook form for you. Should be basically perfect. The reason there's 2 numbers here, so you'll see 2 to 6 and 0 to 2, this is the first exercise of the day or the first exercise of a new area or muscle group. So if I was going to start with bench on my chest and back day, just for example, I would probably do 2 to 6 warm-up sets for the bench press before I actually start it. So those are going to be light, and we'll talk more about how to warm up. But 2 to 6 sets there, and the stronger you are and the more warm-ups you like, do more. But if you're not doing at least 2, it's probably for sure not enough. I would usually do 4 or 5 personally. After that, so now let's say I'm going to go do incline, right, after my chest, after my bench. Now I'm reasonably warmed up because I've warmed up that area now. It's mainly getting ready for the motor pattern. So 0 to 2 warm-up sets. I will tell you, though, I'm not a huge fan of constantly selecting 0. Remember, strength, you're switching to a new motor pattern. You're probably pretty strong, so you're lifting relatively heavy weight. So do a set or 2 to, again, ingrain that perfect motor pattern and prepare yourself for that. I'm a huge believer in warm-up sets for perfecting form and for keeping you injury-free. How many reps are we going to do? Well, most working sets, not our warm-up sets, most working sets should be 1 to 6 reps when we train for strength. Okay, so 1 to 6 reps. We'll talk about variances there in a second, but that's a good standard. How many sets per exercise? So if I chose the bench press, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'll do my warm-up sets, then when I actually get to work, I'm going to do 1 to 6 reps, I'm going to do 2 to 6 sets of that. So 1 set is almost for sure not enough. 2 is on the kind of that bare minimum. A lot of people do 3 sets. You've probably heard of 5 sets of 5 as being the single most classic common strength recommendation. But you have a lot of wiggle room in there. Okay? But 2 to 6 sets. If you do a lot more than 6 sets, you can, but there's obviously a point of diminishing returns. How many other exercises are you going to get? The workout's going to take a really long time. So generally, that 3 to 6 sets works pretty well for that. For load, it should be relatively heavy. We're only doing 6 reps. Okay, so the load should be heavy. Now, I personally don't think you have to be absolutely married to this number, and as long as you're following progressive overload, life is going to be good. But in general, you want most of your sets around that 85% or higher. So if I could bench 300 pounds, that would mean I'd want to be doing around 270 pounds or more. If I spend a ton of time just dicking around with 180 while I'm trying to get really strong, that's probably not going to be as effective. Okay, so we need to be relatively heavy. And here's a huge difference that I don't think gets nearly enough press. Okay, the rest time for strength, right? Most people know this, but in terms of contrasting it with size, the rest time for strength is relatively long. So at least 2 minutes. In the last video, we talked about the phosphagen system. That's what's powering this work. Okay, so we need at least 2 minutes to let that ATP and CP recharge. And more commonly on tough sets, don't be afraid to take 3, 4, or 5 minutes. Also, a quick little litmus test. Let's say your program calls for a tough set of 4, right? You're doing squats, tough set of 4. Well, if you've rested 2 minutes and you're thinking to yourself, damn, if I go now, I'm only going to get 2 or 3 reps, but if I rest 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to get that 4th rep. Go ahead, and that time for the rest is worthwhile. Now, if you're resting 2 minutes and you're like, oh, I'm going to destroy this set of 4, no worries whatsoever, then you don't need to just sit there and continue to twiddle your thumbs. You're ready to go. Okay? But don't be afraid to rest a little bit longer, especially on your more intense sets, on your bigger compound barbell exercises. Okay? So this is our general guideline when training for strength. Okay, and it doesn't say it up here, but we're for sure going to want to work out at least twice a week when going for strength. Much more common is 3 or 4 times a week. I think 4 is probably the single most common for powerlifters. You can do 5 or 6, but then you do have to watch recovery and doing too much total work. So in general, plan on, an intense 90-minute, 2-hour-long workout 4 times a week is pretty standard. Again, if that's kind of optimal, what I would say. And then if you can't do that, you may have to cut out a few things. But we need to be spending at least 3 hours a week lifting for sure if I want to get stronger. All right, let's contrast that a little bit with size. Right? So now the person's goal is to build size. Bodybuilders represent this at the highest level. Okay, so for them, exercises per workout, I'm going to do probably 1 more. So 5 to 8 exercises. So if you only did 4 and you're going for size, it's probably not enough. But again, if you program in 15 exercises for size, how hard are you going to be able to go on all of those exercises? Quality over quantity still rules. Exercises per area, 3 to 5. So no longer is 2 acceptable. So if you're trying to build up muscle, you really want to hit it with probably at least 3 exercises per area. Okay? But not more than 5. Warm-up sets. Well, you're not going as heavy, so you don't need to warm up as much. So just using that same person, this person was going to bench 270 for, say, a set of 5. Well, this same person, same strength, but now they may do 225 for 10 or 8, so you don't need to warm up quite as much as that. So 2 to 4 warm-up sets on your first exercise. You still be doing some, and we're hopefully have some level of strength here. And then 0 to 2 after that. So for that incline, those flies, whatever, you can kind of jump on with fewer warm-up sets. Generally, when we train for size, we do a moderate number of reps. That means 6 to 12 reps per set. Okay, 6 to 12 is a good standard. When we train for size, one of the biggest differences, we do high volume. Volume is how much weight did you lift, times how many reps you did, times how many sets you did. When you train for size, you're typically going to have the highest volume. So 3 sets at least, up to 6 sets. So if you look at, Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, which is a cool book, right? He's doing 5 sets at 10 and 4 sets at 8 and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, that's going to match this recommendation. Of course, because we're doing more reps, we're not going to go as heavy. So now we're going to do 67 to 85% of our 1 rep max. And these percentages correspond well with these reps. Most people can do 85% of the 1 rep max 6 times. Most people can do 67, 12, or actually a few more, but that's close enough. Okay, so that's considered moderate weight. And then when it comes to rest, here's one of the biggest differences. Your rest should be intentionally short. The way you recruit new motor units is force yourself to work when you're reasonably tired. Now, that doesn't mean a 5-second rest. If you're just so exhausted you can't do anything, right, we still need to lift kind of heavy. So a 10-second rest or whatever isn't going to work. But at least 30 seconds, up to 2. You can sometimes stretch it to kind of 3 minutes, but we don't want full recovery. Okay? And in fact, if I just had to summarize everything when it comes to program design, in my mind, the single biggest difference in program design between size and strength is actually the rest time. When you go for size, you want near full recovery, but a little less. Okay, the person should still be kind of breathing just a little bit, and they should think, gee, I'd really love another minute or two to go, because you're going to force those muscles to work, and they're going to get closer to fatigue and closer to muscle failure. When it comes to rest, strength, right, we want full recovery. The breathing should be back to normal. They should be basically facing that next set feeling just as good as when they started. Okay, and if I had to pick, that's probably the single biggest difference when it comes to actual program design for strength versus size, assuming you're choosing the right exercises. Now, you'll note I have these arrows here, okay? With size, the cool thing about size, or the fun things about size, is you can have the most variability. Your goal is to target as many motor units, as many muscle fibers as possible. You want the type 1s, you want the type 2As, you want the type 2Bs, you want to stimulate the whole shebang, okay? And so what this means is, my recommendation when training for size is to do 50% of your work in the gym following these guidelines. However, some of the time, about 25% of the time, you should actually train the way for strength to make sure we're hitting those top motor units and make sure we're also getting stronger and lifting heavier weight. And 25% of the time, do not be afraid at all to use higher reps. Okay, and in fact, you're going to talk to a lot of people that higher reps kind of take that muscle to that next level and can recruit those last little motor units that are tough to fire. So 25% of the time, train more for endurance. Okay, when it comes to strength, I don't have it written up here, but I would say 60 or 70% of your training is here. Okay, the rest of it here, and just a small little bit, less than 10% of your training may mimic what you would do for endurance. All right, let's just compare and contrast those two with endurance, just so you can see a little bit of a difference. Okay, exercises per workout, we're going to do a little bit more, 5 to 10 exercises per workout. Per area, though, is going to be down. Much more common to do like a total body routine when we're training for endurance. So we're only going to do 1 to 3 exercises per area of your body or per specific movement. Okay, the warm-up sets also, big difference, right? You're warming up. I mean, the work set here for this same person, maybe 185 for 15 is what they're benching. They may only need 1 or 2 warm-up sets and they're good to go. Okay, and especially once they're warmed up, just fly into it. Okay, a lot of times it's body weight exercises and you don't need as much warm-up for that. The reps here is high, 12 or more. 12 to 20 standard, but if you want to practice getting better at sets of 30, 40, 50, you got to do that at some point in your training. So you can do, all the way up to 100 or something like that if you want. But at least 12 for endurance. Okay, and this is particularly working on what we would call multiple set muscle endurance. How many sets? Well, because we're doing so many reps, the sets actually are dropped. So we're going to do 2 or 3 sets. Okay, so think of somebody benching on, bench sets of 20, just 2 or 3 sets. You don't need to do 5 sets of 20. That's just exhausting. Okay, then when it comes to the load, now the load is going to be light. If we're going to do 12 reps, it has to be relatively light, less than 67%. However, it's worth mentioning, we usually want to lift at least half of our 1 rep max. So if I could bench 300 pounds, I would want to bench at least 150. Otherwise, it's kind of like, why am I even, I don't want to just dick around with 95 pounds all the time. Okay, so even if I'm doing high reps. So it should be usually at least 50% of what you could lift. And the biggest difference here is, especially if you're trying to build that multiple set endurance, which is your ability to do something, rest briefly, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Okay, that's short rest, 30 seconds. Okay, so you're only resting 30 seconds. That you really got to watch a clock on, because when you're exhausted like this, that minute's going to go, and definitely keep it under a minute. Okay? So those are your general training parameters, right? When we're training for endurance, 2 to 4 times a week would be pretty standard. For size, again, I think about the same as strength. So at least 3 times a week, 4 times a week is great. You can go 5 times a week. Just watch excess. I don't think there's any reason to train 7 days a week. Honestly, even if you wanted to get in that kind of frequency, I would do 2 days on 1 or more days and give yourself a day off, both for life and for your body to rest. All right, let's tease out some of the other differences when it comes to size. Okay, and I have my size list up here, and generally strength is going to contrast this. If someone's goal is to build size, right, so we want to make the muscle bigger, there's a couple of broad things we're looking for. Number one, higher volume, we mentioned that. Okay, look at how many reps we're doing here and how many sets with still decent weight. Okay, when you add up your tonnage, the total weight lifted, it's going to be the highest on size. So a bodybuilder is going to lift more total tonnage than a powerlifter will during a regular workout, almost for sure. Okay? The rest is shorter. Now that doesn't mean crazy short, because again, you got to go heavy, but we talked about this. You don't have a full recovery, and that, in my opinion, is huge. TUT is time under tension. So each set is going to last longer. We talked about how the phosphagen system primarily fuels everything up here. Well, now when we get to this, there's still a lot of phosphagen in here, but also now we get a lot of fast glycolysis. These sets tend to burn, right? At the end, you're like, oh, God, and you get that pump and it's kind of bloated. Okay, greater time under tension. Most strength sets last 5 to 15 seconds. Okay, for these sets, you're looking at 15 to 45 seconds in terms of time under tension. You definitely want to have more eccentric focus. Now, I think strength still has an important eccentric focus, but you want to, go that little slower lifting speed, that 2-2 or 2-4 count works well. With strength, usually it's, just enough control on the negative and then relatively powerful on the positive. I rarely intentionally slow down the speed, especially on the big lifts. Okay, with size, I'm much more likely to incorporate more isolation work and more machines. Okay, my goal is just to target that muscle. I don't have to necessarily do it in a high skill environment, whereas I'm more interested in doing that with strength. I'm going to use a lot more intensity techniques. So when you hear people talking about drop sets and supersets and giant sets and pre-exhaustion, and blood flow restriction and all that fun stuff, that's going to be intensity techniques almost always, maybe not quite that much, but very frequently the goal of the intensity technique is to fatigue the muscle and then force you to keep working, okay, to recruit new motor units, right? That's the whole point of that, so that goes well with that. But the negative is when you're super exhausted, right, your weight usually goes way down. So for strength, we typically don't like that. There's only a few intensity techniques that work really well for strength, okay? Longer recovery, what I mean by this is you're a little more likely to have a lower frequency of training. The standard is twice a week. That seems to work well. And if you only had a really short period of time, like if someone just said, oh man, I got to build up my rear delts and I only have 2 months to do it, then I would be more inclined to go, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times a week. But if somebody just came to me and was like, hey, I'm looking to get my whole body bigger, right, and I have plenty of time to do it, right, then twice a week, honestly, once a week can work very well, particularly for lifters that have a little more experience or are a little bit bigger. Right, so this is where that once a week split comes in, and the whole idea is you smash that muscle. So I train my chest on Monday, then I rest all the way until next Monday before I really stimulate that area super intentionally again. That can work well. I also personally think that's good for long-term training. Right? If you're going to be in this game for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you want to be able to let your joints recover. Okay, so not longer recovery in terms of minutes in between sets, but longer recovery for rest. Okay. Also, you're going to have more variety, both more variety in this kind of training, more changes in your program. Okay. You don't have to always follow exactly what the plan says. The goal is just to go in and hit that muscle and hit it hard and fatigue it. So in some ways, strength training, there's less pressure, right? With size training, there's less pressure. With strength training, you really got to follow the plan. You got to follow the recipe. And if you don't hit those numbers, right, that strength may not be coming. But for size, as long as you take it and you fatigue it, you're good to go. Now, if we contrast that with strength, okay, so strength means we're going to do lower volume, right? Think of 5 sets of 5. That's actually decent volume for strength, and it may be, that's not that much total work. You might even do 3 sets or something like that. So it's not as much volume. Your rest time is much longer. Remember, you want to approach each set relatively fresh so you can attack and dominate that weight. Okay, less time under tension. So again, most sets, if you actually time the lifting phase, is going to be 15 seconds or less, is pretty standard. Okay, you still want to do some eccentric focus. I don't think you need to painstakingly go super slow on the negative, but you want a little bit of negative because that strength is going to be in there. Now, we're not talking a ton about power, but I do think this is a good way to kind of make a quick segue. If we contrast the way, for example, powerlifters train with Olympic lifters, right? One of the biggest differences is when you do Olympic lifting, so that's the snatch, the clean and jerk, and their kind of exercises. Most of those exercises have no eccentric component, right? You get it up here, you just drop, the weights go down, then you start over again. Okay, other than that, it's similar, low reps, high rest, right? Key exercises, right? They're not just doing a whole ton of fluff exercises, but it's just a couple of classics. But they have very little eccentric focus. And when we think about the results that Olympic lifters get, well, obviously one of the best things is, of course, it develops power. And those people, men and women, can get very strong doing that. But in my mind, probably the worst result is lack of muscle growth. Now, certainly some muscles grow. Usually their quads grow from all the squats. Usually the traps grow and things like that. But a lot of really high-level Olympic lifters don't have what I would consider to be an impressive muscular physique. And if you're looking to kind of be that person that, kind of announces that you lift just by your physical presence, if you wanted to look like Arnold or Stallone, well, that's not ideal. Okay, now again, they may not care about that. I'm not saying it's a big negative of those things, but if you look at the way they train, removing the eccentric from their training results in a lot less muscle growth typically. So if we want muscle growth, we really want to focus on size, and on strength, we still want to have, remember, your negative contractions should be strong, and so we still want to be ready for that. Both the squat and the bench have a high negative right before we do the regular lift, so we do not want to take away that completely. Okay, and I'll give you my thoughts on negatives on deadlifts in a little while. We're going to do less isolation exercises. Okay, so for strength, we're going more for the neuromuscular coordination, right, working on that motor pattern. So it doesn't help me all that much if I do some tricep kickbacks. Of course, it can be okay, assistance exercise, but it's not going to be my big focus. I'm focused on the big things that I think will help the big three. Okay, I'm probably going to do fewer machines. We're going to talk about exercise selection more. Okay, but generally, it doesn't mean never, but not a ton of machines. That's certainly not going to be the meat and potatoes. I'm going to do fewer intensity techniques because they're going to create too much fatigue, and then I can't lift with the form and the weight that I want. Okay, and then here what I mean by the recovery is, since our training is a little more neural in nature when we go for strength training, we can train a little more frequently per week. So we almost for sure want to go at least twice a week. Okay, and there may be periods where we do high frequency. Now that does have some negatives. We do not want to overtrain, especially when we're strong. But we can get away sometimes with 3 or 4, even 5 times a week of doing a similar motion. You do have to program very smart when you do that, but that's much more of an option. And you can have a ton of variety. You can certainly have some, but the bottom line is, if you're a powerlifter, you got to get good at squats, you got to get good at bench, you got to get good at deadlifts. And there are some things that focus on that, but for example, squat, you got to spend some freaking time squatting. Okay, if you hate squats, you're like, well, I like leg press, and I like lunges, and I like step-ups. Great. That doesn't help your squat that much. Obviously, it helps it compared to someone who doesn't do anything, but it doesn't help it that much. You got to spend a lot of time squatting and just basic barbell squatting, basic barbell benching. Okay, so it's less variety in your program as we go through. All right, so this should give you a pretty good idea when you sit down to write a program. We haven't talked about exercise selection yet, and that is huge. Okay, but when it comes to the nuts and bolts, this is what I like to call this information of when you're setting up a program. Okay, think about, all right, and we will talk more about splits and the frequency, like, do we do total body or push-pull or chest day or whatever. But as we go through that, once you kind of have an outline of the days of week that you want to train, now you can start to think about, okay, well, I only have 4 to 7 exercises, what am I going to choose? And then once you choose them, you're going to program in things like this that seem to fit, at least on the vast majority of those exercises. Or if your goal was size, here we go. Okay, there's nothing wrong with switching. Remember, most programs are broken into 2 to 3 month long mesocycles. There's nothing wrong with switching, from having a strength focus for a while, and then switching to a size focus. Because remember, they are both those 2 key variables. Plus just mental variety. If you're going to be doing this thing forever, it's nice to stimulate your body in different ways. You could even have a shorter endurance focus if you want, especially if you want to be the healthier, fitter powerlifter that's out there. Okay, but this information right here, this covers a huge amount of info when it comes to programs, and if programs don't meet this, then that's a pretty big red flag. Okay, I'm not going to say for sure it means they're total bullshit, but you would want to look at that pretty critically, and that kind of should raise the hairs on the back of your neck, so to speak, as you start to think about, hey, is this a real thing, or what's up with this? Okay. Next week, we're going to be analyzing the biomechanics of each lift, and we're going to start with the squat. So what is happening joint-wise on the squat, what's happening muscle-wise on the squat, some key important form techniques, tips, things like that, so we can analyze, take a quick look at the squat, and become a master of it.